On Tuesday, President Joe Biden signed an executive order that seeks to improve education for Black students. The White House is establishing two commissions within the Department of Education. One will raise awareness around challenges for Black students. It will also increase Black children's access to high-quality early childhood programs. The second panel will make recommendations to the president about educational equity and economic opportunity. According to the White House, predominantly Black school districts are more likely to be underfunded than districts that are majority white. And according to experts, this could be a systemic racism issue.
Many neighborhood school boundaries were created in an era of racist housing codes. And what that means is you have a lot of low-income kids of color concentrated in some of the lowest performing schools. And we need to really take a look at the whole system, which really was created generations ago and rooted in systemic racism, and take a look at that and say, how can we do better?
And here to dive deeper into this issue and the president's new order is Sharif El-Mekki from the Center for Black Educator Development. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
The executive order seeks to make good on a Biden campaign promise to expand access to high quality education and to combat racial inequality in education. So what are your thoughts on the timing of this order?
I think this order is really important and the timing couldn't be better. As you see, there's a consistent underfunding and undermining the educational outcomes of Black students. We see that the COVID exacerbated many of the racial inequities that had already been experienced for generations in Black communities. We see also that this administration ran on the idea of diversification of the teaching force, understanding that 80% of the public school teachers across the country are white. Most of them are white women. Places like Pennsylvania, 94% of the public school teachers are white. And what we have to have as a part of this is a concerted effort to diversify, but also to ensure that educators coming into schools, educating other people's children, are well prepared, have a deep understanding, and that we address the cultural incompetence that is really one of the biggest achievement gaps in our nation.
You bring up such an important point because what you're basically saying is that it's very likely that a Black or a brown student could go through their primary education and never see a teacher or experience a teacher that looks like them. I know that you're a former educator and principal. What were some of the racial inequalities impacting your school district?
So I'll start with what you led with, which is underfunding districts. There was a study done by an organization called Power, where they looked at and controlled for poverty. So even white districts that were poor, or when they were compared to Black districts that were poor, the Black districts still got less money. So the browner, the Blacker, the more melanin in that school district, the less funding that they will receive. And so that conversation about like how students are almost trapped in districts that the policies say they receive less money, that has been a continuation. So it's not just this idea of segregated, because I believe that there can be all Black spaces that are excellent. We see that in HBCUs. We see that in the historical attempts in the Black communities to build schools. We saw that in freedom school movements. We saw that in the Black Panther Liberation Academies. So it's not that in itself, it's the deliberate underfunding and undermining. And the other big piece that impacts Black student achievement is this idea that, and a lot of times when people are talking about achievement gaps, they're talking about students' test scores. The biggest, most pernicious gap is educators' mindsets about the Black children's capacity. So the gap is actually adult efficacy, mindset, paradigms, and what the actual child's potential is. And we see that is one of the biggest things. Many people call it the belief gap in what is implemented in policies, in funding decisions, in curriculum, and teacher prep, and so on and so forth. And that is what is most pernicious to a Black child's ultimate outcomes and potential.
That's fascinating, because what you're saying is that this is a deep-rooted systemic issue.
Absolutely.
So how do we educate our educators?
So we need a different type of teacher preparation program. Most of the new teachers who are interviewed and asked about how well were you prepared, many of them say, I am not prepared to teach culturally, racially different students. And so we have to start there. If they, after 4 or 5 years and thousands of dollars, and a educator still coming into our communities and saying to parents, I'm not prepared to teach your child. We would not accept that from any other field. Imagine a doctor showing up and saying, hey, I'm not prepared I was not prepared to perform surgery on your child, but give me your child anyway, and let me do this surgery. Then we have to think about how we're preparing educators. One of the big things that we work on as we're building with other partners, this National Black Teacher Pipeline, is using this opportunity to provide Black students with early exposure and clinical experiences through our Freedom School Literacy Academy, which was built on that Freedom School movement from long ago through SNCC that was reinvigorated by Marian Wright Edelman with Children's Defense Fund, and learning from our partners like Philadelphia Freedom School. So using that, how have Black communities always educated children, and why is that not a part of teacher prep programs? Many teacher prep programs are focusing on Dewey and Horace Mann, white educational theorists, white behavior theorists, white child psychologists, and these theory that did not imagine Black children attending the schools, let alone being successful. So let's make sure we are preparing teachers in ways that the communities have historically worked with parents, partner with families, and educated the children in those communities, and prioritizing that instead of marginalizing it, erasing it, and only using a white paradigm and framework to educate Black and brown children.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. But we've been reporting on the decline in the number of people who even want to go into education. So how do we get more Black and brown educators or Black and brown educated people to want to pursue the field?
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. Chris Emden, a friend of our program, Dr. Chris Emden, talks about recruiting some Black students is like inviting them back to the scene of a crime that was committed against themselves because of such negative experiences, because of the negative mindsets and the low expectations that people have, not only for the students, but for themselves at leading classrooms in schools and districts. And so we have to start there. But there's also some very promising information that we've been getting directly from high school students. There are high school students that we work with who identify as Black and African American. They said that we want a campaign to ensure that people don't confuse schooling with education, and that they have always been part of the educational process, that they are always leading and supporting their peers and their colleagues and younger siblings. So when Mary Church Terrell talked about lifting as we climb, that's a framework that we can use as we recruit and support and retain Black educators. When Dr. Ivory Tolson looked at Black men in HBCUs, teaching was one of the top 10 professions that they were interested in. Our friends in Chicago from Thrive and Chris Goins, when they interviewed Black boys, 10% of the Black boys that they spoke with were interested in teaching. And so we see that the junior servant leaders and the servant leader apprentices through our Freedom School Literacy Academy, when we speak to them, they are very interested in teaching as activism, as teaching as a way to lift as they climb. And they see the connection between educational justice and racial justice. And for that, they want to help lead classrooms. They want to learn how to do it. And we have to make sure that we're designing opportunities for these youth to connect their activism, their love for their community, their desire to support their younger siblings, and whether it's by blood or by community. And they can do that by leading a classroom. So we've seen in our Freedom School Literacy Academy an increase in students who are interested in teaching after they go through our program. And all of them, 100% of the apprentices that we work with, said that if they teach, they want to teach Black children. So I think for us, that is a start, building this national Black teacher pipeline through an apprenticeship program that can be where we partner with ecosystems in regions and districts to engage their Black high school youth.
Well, thank you so much for being with us and for all that you do. We appreciate you.
My pleasure.